Welcome to the Styleframe Saturdays podcast. I'm your host, Caroline Lee. Join me as I take a deep dive into the wonderful world of Styleframes and interview those who are industry wizards when it comes to this stage of the animated production process. For those who may not know, Styleframes are pieces of creative that are developed during the pre-production phase of an animation project, and they help creators and clients alike get an idea of the overall style of a piece. Sometimes the initial vision is carried through to the end, and other times it ends up on the cutting room floor. During this podcast, we'll discuss projects of all shapes and sizes, and the challenges, rewards, and lessons learned while developing what I like to call each guest's favorite frame. Before getting into the details of today's show, though, the Styleframe Saturdays team would like to give a quick shout out to Riverside. Riverside is the tool that we use to develop this podcast, and it simply wouldn't exist without it. There are so many great features to this tool, but one of our absolute favorites is its ability to upload tracks simultaneously and continuously to the cloud while being recorded. We can't thank Riverside enough for making our podcasting effortless, so we have a link in today's show notes for anyone who's interested in checking it out. So now that you know how we're getting this podcast to you, let's dive into episode 5. I think it's safe to say that today's guest is a legend when it comes to Styleframe development. His social feeds are Styleframe gold mines. In fact, I bet if you look up the word Styleframe, his name goes hand in hand. He's worked on some big name projects throughout his career, including title sequences, ad campaigns, and broadcast commercials. And his style is uniquely distinguishable from anything I've ever seen. I'm so stoked to have him on today and talk all things Styleframes, so please help me in welcoming Justin Harder to the show. Hey, Justin. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. How have you been?
Well, hello. Thank you very much for having me. I'm doing very well. Super psyched. This is so cool. Styleframe Saturdays. My goodness.
It's very new. You're one of the, beginning podcast guests, so we're stoked to have you here. You do a ton of Styleframe concepts and development and stuff like that. So I'm really itching to get into, the frame you're going to be sharing with us today. But for anybody who doesn't know you or is unfamiliar with your work, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about yourself and your sort of creative path and journey and career thus far?
Sure. I run a studio called Claus Studios. There's a plural on studios, like there's many of them, but it's really me. I do illustration design for commercials, films, really brands, really anything, to be honest with you. Um, Obviously, I'm here for my style frames, and it's cool that you honed in on style frames because, as in my business, it's what obviously wins jobs. The concept, you got to show the concept of what you want to pitch, what you want to show, and so style frames have become. Early on in my career, they were called. There's one place. What it was called. Jazzles or something. Was that? No, I just made that up. It's not Jazzle. Sizzle. They're like, hey, you get some sizzle frames, And this is early. I'm telling. This is like 2006, so I'm dating myself. But they really weren't a thing early on. Like, they're just kind of concept pieces. But now it's pretty standard. 1920, 1080 HD style frames. Let's see what you got. You got to know what the commercial looks like. So it's cool that you picked up on obviously making a podcast, vlogcast about this and to delve into that world because it really is our bread and butter as motion designers.
That's true. That's a very good point. And it's funny you say the sizzle frames or whatever they were called too. I feel like there's so many different, there's a ton of terminology around, what they are. I feel like Styleframes is pretty standard now, but I've heard keyframes and, the meat and potatoes of like a pitch deck, excuse me, and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny to see how the name has even transformed over time too.
Yeah, totally. They really have it. It's become very much an industry standard to, some places would require one. I've done as little as one for a project and worked as long as a week on one style frame for a project and done as many as 25, 50, 45, 50 for pitches. And I'm sure a lot of motion designers can attest to. Sometimes I obviously will go through multiple concepts, 6 frames per concept, a couple of concepts, maybe 9 frames per concept, maybe 3 concepts in 5 days, but breaking it out and to see how different studios work with creative directors and what they're looking for is always interesting to me because I love and I feel that the style frames become the most successful when you're casted appropriately, and you feel comfortable with the task that you're being asked to execute in the time frames. Because a lot of the time, as you well know, we don't have a lot of time in the commercial industry. More so,
For
probably in
sure.
the film world of title sequences might have a bit more time. But
For sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, time frames nowadays, I mean, I feel like everybody wants everything yesterday too. So it's interesting, we can be so productive nowadays, and I think that just comes with the territory too. And now everything's like 2 weeks, 1 week. Sometimes you see days
you've seen this,
for
yeah.
things. Yeah.
I totally agree. I've talked with a couple of folks about that, a couple of peers, and they've mentioned this, the timeline will get a little shorter for that too. So yeah, I guess it's kind of happening industry wide right now,
Yeah,
which can
definitely.
actually for sometimes it can benefit the creative quite a bit.
That's true
Do
too.
you do you find that? I mean, I feel like sometimes I get uh, a little bit more amped and revved up when I only have a couple days. I know I need to burn the engine a little bit harder and faster than opposed to a 5 day one where there might be a few different pieces, or even that's a short booking. But this is all concept stuff. I mean, production
Right.
bookings are longer, and obviously, but
Right.
you know, uh, I don't know how many if the people that you've talked to so far and what their bookings usually are, but they can range from a couple days to I guess a couple weeks for concept stuff. But
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I feel like, well, our first guest, Liam, he was talking about the frame that he shared. It was a project that was like a pretty short booking too. So, and that was just for the entire booking. But yeah, I think we specifically had talked about, like, well, what about getting like sort of the concept phase part of it done? And he was just like, maybe a couple days, so so the timelines do get short sometimes. And I do agree with you too. I think that, project depending, I think it depends on the scope of the project and the creative approach of the project. It either definitely will amp me up to be like, okay, like, this is a really cool concept, and let's have at it for this next couple of days. And then other times, if it's a longer booking, I'm sort of like, all right, this feels like the right amount of time for this one too. So I just feel like it kind of like ebbs and flows for me, at least. I don't know how you feel about it.
yeah, and depending on the style with which the concept requires, and how comfortable I feel learning uh, possibly a new way to handle something, or to add a new tool or a new practice I've been doing in my own personal work to insert it, maybe going like, hey, this might be a possibility to do this new thing I've been doing on the sidelines here, and trying to shoehorn it in sometimes, at least for a concept that could be a toss away, because I love doing the ones that are so outrageous that there's not a chance, but then all of a sudden there might be a chance.
That's
And
right. You
that
never know.
and that means a lot. That really means a lot to me if they go with something that's so left field, or at least bring it into the realm of watering it down to bring to another concept or something. And then we as artists can say, yes, and to get
Right.
those kind
Right.
of little tiny victories, because I think that's what I live for, the passion of in that world of getting things across where it's not necessarily um, and a given that it was going to be the direction that the client would go for.
Right. Right. Very cool. Yeah. Well, so you had said, you started your own studio,
Yes.
and you're just mostly doing or only doing the design and illustration part, like for the concept stuff. You're not doing any of the animation stuff.
Yeah, I don't animate. Yeah, I kind of glossed over
Okay.
that because I got so jazzled. I'm using that word, by the way. I'm going to hashtag the heck out of that, jazzles.
This is going to be the jazziest episode ever.
Oh,
So,
social jazzle frames. Sounds like it's pretty cool. Okay, so I started out working in full time at a place in Dallas, Texas called Real Effects, and you might have heard that
okay.
they've done a few, maybe more than a few animated movies now, I believe. But
For sure.
um, started out in their art department, like entry level illustrator kind of thing, and it was just that where I graduated from Ringling College of Art and Design with an illustration degree, and this is in 2003, and it's like on the cusp of really the digital age in college education as well, in art school education, because I took a couple of
Hmm.
courses in digital art, but it was almost like, hey, here's how to use Illustrator and the pen tool. Boop, 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 make an eyeball. Wee, make a smiley face. Here's a clown. And it's like, okay, that was like really technical, and like I don't want to pull on the little things all the time and to make the curves and the spleens and all the things and keep touching them. So it was almost like I don't know about all that, but as you get out, I got out of school, I was learning how to apply the skills I had as an illustrator in a different form, mats, and basically you do what you have to do in order to make it as a professional. And
Right.
I wanted to make it. This is all I had. It's like there's no fallback. I've always wanted to draw for a living and entertain with my drawings and my artwork. That's my goal. That's what's in my heart. And it's like
Hmm.
there's no fallback, so it's going to happen. But my first year was really rough. I only did some murals after graduation. Did a couple murals around Sarasota and like Orlando, and it was like, is this it? And I started getting into band T-shirt designs, and then kind of getting a little bit of a head of steam going with that, like doing stuff for Sugar Cold and like Midtown and like a Sugar Cold and Midtown and Brand New and then 311 and then Sarah Bareilles and then the Fray. So kind of
Very
ping
cool.
ponging up with this T-shirt design thing and kind of brand design, and at the same time, I got a job at a place that afforded me. And this is before freelance. I couldn't get. I mean, I was trying to do freelance, but I just wasn't getting the hits. And
Right.
yeah, this place, Real Effects, really gave me kind of the grad school of like being able to work on different projects. Each day was two different projects, a half day in the morning on one, half day in the afternoon on another, totally different styles. And it's like you didn't have any other way to handle it besides, roll up your sleeves and say, okay, well, I got to be able to do this because they're employing me and I want to continue doing this. And you get better and better and better. And it was a great place to learn. I learned so much and was on the computer a lot because obviously the final form of commercials has to go through digital unless
Hmm.
you're filming it, and we weren't filming, we're putting stuff into them. So doing a little bit of hand done stuff and or everything like that. But we're getting Photoshop, and now I'm in Photoshop all the time, but I do the hand done stuff if I want to. Anyway, jumping ahead there, but that was I did 7 years as a full timer at the commercial
Wow.
studio doing first this jazzles and then the sizzles and then the style frames came up and got a title sequence with this movie called Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium that
Wow. That's
we did
awesome.
we did there. And have you seen that one? Have you seen the
I haven't seen the movie. No, I haven't, but I know of it. Like I remember the visuals from like, the concept art and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, okay. We did the opening titles on that one, and it was with a guy named Danny Del Purgatorio who was at Frame Store for a bit, and
Okay.
a couple guys back in Dallas, Brandon Oldenburg and Lambert. And so what we ended up doing was I got addicted to the storytelling aspect then of bringing the art and not just doing the commercial stuff with it for a job or whatever and money, yada yada, which was like way down low on my list, but like attached to the storytelling component. Um, and that's where I kind of got bit by the bug of title sequences. And it was the coolest. They put our names in the beginning, in the front of it. They actually asked that's like never heard of. Like in the
Yep.
title sequence for the title, we're like going crazy, and it was all my designs mixed with Danny. It was just so cool. We had such a stamp on it, and it was like free, and that was we could put in whatever we wanted. Got to watch the movie so many times, so that got me going. And then my time in Dallas was up, and it was time to go try out with the big boys out in L.A.
Very cool. And you've been in LA ever since, right?
I was moved out in 2011. Went full time
Hmm.
freelance. Then and created the moniker Klaus Studios as my middle name, and I just felt like it was ambiguous enough to work and to get away from um, I don't know, kind of anything else. There was another Justin Harder out there, and I'm like, I'm not that guy. So I think Klaus was the way I went with it, and it's been good ever since. It was no started out though with no clients in L.A. Went out there,
Oh, wow.
moved out in an RV, lived in Malibu in an RV in a beach park, and it was Malibu RV beach park, best time ever. And started with zero contacts and just started emailing every single studio I liked. You know,
Wow.
if you can't beat them, join them. And so I was trying to join them, man. So it was like brand new school. It was right off the bat. It was my first one to go into. They're still
I
one
was
of my
just going to ask who the first one was. That's awesome.
yeah, they're still one of my favorites. I love those guys over there, and they really gave me a break coming in. And I'll tell you, from working full time in a studio for 8 hours a day, you work hard, and I realized I was at least trained to work very very hard and produce a lot of
Right.
content. I
Hmm.
wasn't going to stop at two frames in a day, no matter how intricate the style was. There's no way. That's not what they're paying me for, and so I would really churn out because I had to. My back was up
Yeah,
against the wall, and you got to make it.
for
So
sure. For sure.
it
That's
was
awesome.
it was a fun time. But that's when we would go into studios a lot more than now. Well, now, who knows when everyone's going to really go back or feel comfortable, even if they want you back. But
Right.
at the time, you had to go in and have the art director over your shoulder, and just needing to please them, and to make sure that you hit their creative each day. And
Right.
that's obviously, we're in the service industry. You got to please the folks that need to be pleased. So
Definitely. Definitely.
yeah, I get pretty jacked about obviously talking about the story of it and like how you come up and everything. So each person's journey is just so different.
It is. It's very different, and it's really nice to hear everybody's sort of introduction and how they got into this and what they're doing now, because even sometimes how they got into this is like they were in a completely separate industry as well. And it sounds like from what you're saying, you've known that you've always wanted to do this. Plus you went to Ringling. I mean, Ringling's always producing amazingly talented creatives
Yeah.
out of their school as well. So, yeah, to kind of hear that you had started out like even just doing the t-shirt stuff, that's really cool too. Working with some of these big
Well,
name artists and stuff, that's amazing.
well, and
And then with Real and now out in LA and working with some of the studios that you've, had the opportunity to work with, which I know we'll get into with your favorite frame and everything, but it's just really cool to kind of see the arc of everything thus far because it's not over yet. There's obviously more to come too.
oh, totally. Yeah, no, but you're very right about folks how they get into it at different times. And I'm very fortunate to know since I was a kid that I wanted to draw for a living and do that
Hmm.
because it was like my secret power that people smiled at when I did it. And that was
Right,
something that
right.
was very different than other things that I could always control, and it was like if you didn't have it just felt like it immediately inspired a happiness in a way, and I really love that feeling of that. and
I
uh,
love that. Yeah.
and, and so yeah, the high school, the art clubs, and the high school, the AP classes, and then you kind of get into where I applied to, I think CalArts and SCAD and Ringling. And
Okay.
I visited Ringling when I was like 14 with my grandfather, and seeing that, and I kind of had that in my mind. I love the beach, and I love the campus, and I love the beach, and I love the fact the illustration program was like in the top 3 or 4 in the nation. Now they have a
Uh-huh.
motion design uh, major, of course, like every studio. I'm sorry, every
Right.
college, every art college, most of the time out there, and who knows if, I mean, a lot of folks go to the School of Motion. There's so many different ways to get your portfolio nowadays up to snuff or whatever.
It's so true. Yeah. No, there's not that there's, well, maybe there is more opportunity, but I was going to say, there's just more than one way to like get there now. And there's an even more direct way to get there. And, yeah, to hear folks say like, well, I started out, in even just doing music and then I ended up here. It's sort of like, wow, that's a really interesting story to tell too, like
Yeah,
how did you get from music to here? Like what was the bridge over, It's just always very fascinating to hear everybody's stories.
yeah. So with those bands, it was more when I came out of Ringling at a time, it was such a different world because this wasn't a thing for the most part.
Hmm.
Not really in 2003. And so they basically trained us to be editorial illustrators, which is you would do
Hmm.
like a spot illustration for Time magazine in the back, or like a cover for Rolling Stone. But it's like you're competing for one cover illustration for Rolling Stone every month that maybe they wouldn't even have an illustration. But you know what I'm saying? It's like, or a newspaper editorial illustrator. And it's like that was kind of like where I was like looking at going, but I want to do some other stuff here. And And I got really into design my junior and senior year at Ringling, and no other illustrators got into typography really as much as I did. I was able to
Mm.
take the expressive typography class, and I had a roommate that was a graphic designer that loved title sequences. So I started kind of looking at that then, but not really knowing how much that was influencing me. And so you are so influenced by your peers anywhere you
Yes.
go in any of these classes, even if it's online. Oh, sometimes we get a little bit closed off where we think they're all competition and we kind of, or imposter syndrome. But there is such a beauty to letting the guard down, taking
Yeah.
in others' work, letting it
Right.
affect you, and then seeing how it can marinate and what happens after you regurgitate, how you would channel that and how it would come out of the Justin filter versus another way.
That's right.
It
That's
just
right.
won't
That's
look
so
this.
true.
It won't look the same. There's no way it could look the same. So, um, yeah, and I think that the music kind of, it was always like a freelancing, and that's what's so nice about freelancing to today. Obviously, is I say I have the studio, but I still, I work from home. It's a home studio. I'll employ, if we have animators on a project that needs production, we'll do remote stuff. But you know, um, there's such a flexibility to the schedules, right? So
Right.
you can. I'm right now finishing up branding a nationwide pizza restaurant that a famous chef is doing, and it's going to be like 15 places nationwide immediately on release, and it's going to be my mural, and the mural that we've designed, I put together in the all the stores there, and I'm coming up with a video for it. So when you have these skills as a motion designer, you can offer them to people in ways with which they might not know the possibilities.
So true. Yeah.
And now you have this. Now you have the skills and the narrative skills and component to be like, okay, here's the brand, and here's the logo, and here's the business cards, and here's the stationery and the pizza box, whatever it is. But there might be something else. There might be some other
Right.
way to get this out there. And so it's
Right.
it's fun right now. As I'm about to put together a director's treatment for this video that could be played on their social and obviously in all their locations and everything. So
Very cool.
yeah.
Oh, it sounds like a fun time.
It's a fun, yeah. There's a lot of different, but like you said about possibilities, now's the time. I mean, there's how
Yes.
many thousands of shows come out on
I was just going to say, between content overload and ads galore, like the possibilities really are endless.
it.
So, yeah, if you want to be a motion designer, do it now.
I think it
Just
is
kidding.
time.
Just kidding.
I know that and I was teaching at Otis, and I wrapped last year, but I was doing a motion design course at Otis. They were looking for folks that were doing it in the industry, and I go, they reached out, and I go, I like the guy that ran the program. I don't have a teaching degree, certainly not a collegiate teaching degree, but you didn't need one if you had the work. And so I ended up falling in love with it and loving the kids and everything, and just having that exchange. But um, there's just there was actually like a kind of ebb and flow to the motion design program at first, where like computer animation was getting all the kids, and then visual development was getting all the students, and then concept art, and then all of a sudden like motion kind of came up.
Yeah.
It really peaked. I think there's what they're seeing, how they can integrate 3D animation into motion design.
Hmm.
But I'll always say, like, the thing that it eludes a lot of the motion design I see is actual design.
Right.
So
Right.
I that's what I love graphic design. It's really I don't even I mean I'm not that great with transitions. I'll hit them if you need me to. I'll hit them. I think that way, and I'll hit them if you need me to. But I like moments. Like when you said keyframes, I feel keyframes. I mean, I get it. I can see why that would be a word that would be used with style frames,
Hmm. Hmm.
because if you can hit those moments, then an animator that knows animation can make it sing. You
That's
know.
true. I love that. That's a great phrase.
Well, have you seen this where sometimes you'll be asked if you can animate a designer, designer illustrator, and they'll say, well, do you animate? And I go, I can animate, but I'm not an animator. Do you see what I'm saying?
Great answer. Yeah.
there's a difference there. I mean,
I
I
see.
know
No, I know what you mean.
I know how After Effects works. I can move some sliders for little hinge joints, doo, 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 like South Park animation, sure. Like, and I can critique animation, but you want an animator, you know? I mean,
Yeah,
an animator is someone that lives and breathes it. They had it in their
it's
heart
true.
that they want to see that life. They get such a joy out of doing it. That's who I want to employ for when I have sequences that need it. Those folks,
Right.
and
Right.
not the designer that kind of does it on the side. Even though there's obviously outliers that are both phenomenal at both. I'm sure this will get some
Hmm.
comments in the old comment section. But animators versus people that animate, I believe, are two kind of different things.
No, and I agree with you there. It's there's a specialty. There's like a just like a niche. Like I don't know what it is. There's just like you can tell. You can always just tell. Like oh, this person lives and breathes animation, and
Yeah,
this person lives and breathes design. They could both very well be motion designers, but you can always pick up on it too. So it's interesting that you bring that up. I can
great point.
see what you're talking about.
Great point. Yeah, they can cross pollinate, but
Yeah.
anyway. So when you asked about animation, yeah, well, I'll sell it as a service to do like a full production thing, but I always
Right.
let my clients know that I won't be the one doing it. That I'll find the best person for the job.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a bit about how like you're very passionate about the design side of stuff. So maybe we should jump into your favorite frame then so that we can talk about your design and concept and creative about what you're going to share with us today.
Okay, this is a really cool question. I'm glad that you had this up, this favorite style frame thing. Because at first I go, this is impossible. What I go, this is there's no way. I go, what? And then it was so great because it cuts to the core of some things. I got to like kind of reassess why it would be a favorite of mine, and I think
Mhm.
that's cool. All right, this is from the pitch. So up until in LA, when I moved out in 2011, I was working on commercials, 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 and
Mhm.
that's great. And I like commercials, and I was getting some styles in there that were winning. I was winning some jobs, and it was feeling awesome. And but I kept wanting to do title sequence. I was really looking forward to telling that story again, to having an impact on something that would be forever. And
Mhm.
got the opportunity through doing commercials with Blur.
Oh,
Do
cool.
you know Blur? Yeah. So,
Yes.
yeah. I was like, they're huge and massive, phenomenal work. Love Death Robots is off the charts for them with the Emmys and everything. So, but before that, doing a lot of commercial work, and I worked with Jen on commercials, and then they got the opportunity to pitch on Thor 2: The Dark World, and
Okay.
she said, Justin, it's an illustration for. We think you'd be great for this idea for Thor 2, and I go, hey, that's a movie. I know that character. I'm obsessed with comic books. It's what I grew up on, which I didn't really get to talk to very much about too. But anyway, early '90s it was all Image Comics, yada yada. So that's why I draw my figures like I draw them. That's why I have Batman behind me. I love them. It's not like I currently read too many. I really don't. But they already influenced me. Like the influence is done. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like now I want to. But okay, so this Thor 2: The Dark World and the concept that they had kicked back and forth from the creative direction side was, um, this is like a second film. It's going to be like a lot darker than the first one. We're thinking something with limited color palette, with maybe the red would be the color, yada yada. And so I'm like, okay, and they didn't really have any. I don't think they had any visual reference, but this is the frame I did that ultimately I did 3 frames, I think, maybe 4 frames for the pitch, and it's the first one I did. And as soon as I did it, I thought, this is the title sequence to Thor 2: The Dark World, which is a cool feeling. Not a cocky feeling. I just felt like it was the right answer. And sometimes you feel
Right.
like right answers are. Felt the same thing with the Blade logo. I did one logo. I didn't have any other answers. I th- there was no. I could have explored more, but I didn't have any other solutions right then. And it was a short gig. But anyway, Thor 2: The Dark World, Marvel went with it, and it was the frame that kicked off more title sequences and kind of working in that world, and branching out from the and keep continuing to then bolster the portfolio with projects that were permanent like films are. So it was great to work with the team on it. I ended up getting, so we did that one, and then the first comment was back. We love that style, and I was over the moon that they went with it because it's just would be me doing the whole title sequence, and then they had to draw. I had to paint 65. I got to paint 65 some odd digital paintings with every
Wow.
single brush stroke of those paintings all on different layers in Photoshop.
Wow.
So the
This was for Thor 2, or this was
this
for a different
this
one?
is for Thor 2, so that the
Oh, wow.
animators
Okay.
could animate. And if you watch the sequence, the brush strokes come in and they paint the scene and everything. And
Yep.
all those strokes were all masked on each PSD file was 4K and probably upwards of 65 to 85 to 115, 20 layers,
Wow.
where it's very different than painting normally, because painting normally you'd hopefully paint on one layer with some additional pieces. All depends on different people's workflow.
Right, right.
But like separating the layers and being like, okay, eyebrow paint, boop, okay, next layer, underneath, boop, next layer, nose, next layer, dark nose, next layer, lighter nose. You get it. I mean, some of
Right,
the
right.
stuff
Wow.
I would lump together, but anyway, it was a blast. It was so, and that's why it's my favorite frame, because it kicked off a whole new a connection with Marvel, and it was just so ecstatic about making it, moving out to LA and not having clients, and then getting to work on uh, where it's all your artwork is of her title sequence was so rad.
Yeah, wow. Like exactly. Like how that must be such a cool feeling to be like, like you came out here, fresh, and then like one of the first big things you work on is a Marvel movie. I mean, that's got to feel pretty incredible.
It was rad. Yeah, and so it's cool that you asked that question. I think it's a really, you're going to get awesome answers from all the talented folks that you talk to, because it does focus you, force you to focus on why is this my favorite? Is it because I like
Right.
how good I did on this one?
Right.
And I'm like, I think it was just conceptually from their side, it was a cool concept, but I am glad I forced myself to, out of the box, will find, not only scan brush strokes in, but go through so many different types of digital paintbrush strokes to figure out that world, and break down. And I got to pick out all the frames that were ultimately painted. I got
That's
to
so
watch the
cool.
movie at their first studio that was like kind of like a work in progress studio. So I got to, me and the creative director, we just sat there, we picked out frames that we wanted to paint over, and it was awesome. Chris Helmsworth, I met him at a in a Whole Foods one time about 3 months after. He was looking at an orange. I went up to him and I said, "Hey, Chris, I love you, man. I painted your face an awful lot for a movie that you're just in, and I just want to come and say hi." And he goes, "Whoa, hold on, bloke. Wait, what, mate? Mate, I think he called me mate because he's Australian. Hold on, mate. What'd you say?" I told him again, and he goes, "Whoa, those were effing awesome." And I'm like, "So are you, Chris Helmsworth." And then I called everybody I knew. And then I knew I had to get out of Whole Foods because I didn't want to walk up and down the aisles with him and be like, "Hey again."
Right, right.
He's like, I'm like,
It's
"Oh,
me
look
again.
at some baking powder this time. What are you making, Chris? Can I come over later for some brownies?" It's like, I got to get out of here. So I just bolted and called everyone. Anyway,
When you were talking about the how you delivered, or sorry, how you were sort of creating the Photoshop layers for this too, because it sounds like, yeah, that there was a ton of like sort of like strategy involved, obviously, for you as the designer to then pass off to the animators. Um,
yeah,
was that something that the creative director at Blur was sort of telling you that's how they needed it delivered, or were you sort of like intuitively thinking like, okay, I'm going to separate everything out so that the animators have every single layer to work with? Like, how did that
yeah,
process come about that you sort of delivered your handoff that in that way?
yeah. We definitely had discussions about the technicality of animating. Because now you've seen it a lot where they'll film someone painting, or the work in progress, or like the time lapse or something, where but it wasn't that at this point, and we definitely had some technical difficulties because it also had to be done in stereoscopic. So
Oh, right, right.
on top of that, the animators were, I think, kind of tasked with a bit, and it was a small team of folks too at Blur at the time. I think it was three. I think it was three,
Wow.
and then one technical director that handled maybe some of the stereoscopic stuff. But it
Hmm.
looked great in stereoscopic. I was blown away. And they did a phenomenal job with the animation too. But yeah, there were discussions, and I would always apologize when I gave them the file. I'd be like, "Okay, shot 24 is done," and they open it up on their computer and they go, "116 layers, all not named.
Oh no. Oh no.
Nice job, Harder." And I go, "Hey man, I got to do like 40 of these things." But
That's what's crazy
I'd
too.
feel real bad. And then they only used like 25, and I did like maybe 65. I
Wow.
painted 5 of Chris Helmsworth. I couldn't get his face right. And they were like, "Dude, get the face right or else we're going to can you." And I'm like, "I'll get there." Just some of them were tricky, but yeah,
I hope you told Chris all of this when he was picking out that orange, by the way.
he's like, "It was awesome. Wait, you're still talking to me." I'm like, "Oh, I am. Are we not best friends now?" No, I thought that's how it
No.
worked.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but yeah, the team was the folks there are such class acts of being able to handle such a monumental undertaking, and then getting to see the work come to life with the animatic, and then they scored the music to our sequence,
Oh, cool.
and they used the score from the movie and the actual composer, and I got to hear that with our sequence, and I was flipping out when I got to see that for the first time as well. So
S-
yeah, that was a big one. So that's my favorite frame right there, folks. There it is.
There it is.
Just because of how influential it was early on. It was such a kickoff to such cool stuff, and I love the comic Thor, and it was just to be able to be tied to the properties that you work on. I think a lot of the artists probably can agree. They start rooting for the projects you work on.
Hmm.
You kind of, you get excited about them.
It's a beautifully crafted like frame though too. So, not only yes, did it sort of kickstart you into like all of these title sequences of working with these wonderful studios. I mean, you've worked with a handful of like top-notch studios too. Um, but is it your favorite frame for more than one reason, or is it the reason that like, I got to work on, this put my foot in the door to work
Yeah.
on these title sequences, or was it technically sort of challenging too in that like you're like I really dig this style too.
Oh,
Like, and that's why I like this frame a lot.
well, that's a good question too. I had never done this style, so I think that as far as pushing myself, I was happy with doing something that I'd never seen before personally. I
Hmm.
hadn't seen that, and when I feel like I've done something I haven't seen before, I always, when like you're designing, and like I'm back here a lot of the time designing, like leaning back, and then I kind of get something going, and I go, okay. It's the lean forward moment. I'm like, "Oh, we're cooking now. I can see something happening." It was the lean forward moment with that for sure. And I took a peek at it when you asked me, and it still holds up, still pretty cool. The face is a little bit more vague than we ended up going. We had to have much more likeness in the faces than that one. That's very ambiguous, and I think
Mm,
initially the rest of my frames for that first batch were a bit more ambiguous,
okay.
but you have to show the talent, and it was the right call. I
Right.
mean, you have to show these phenomenal actors, and in all their glory for their characters, and obviously you can tell that's Thor, but we want to know that it's Chris Helmsworth as Thor, so we started
Right.
getting more
Right.
detailed, and when we got more detailed, I couldn't be as vague with my brushwork. And so it
Hmm.
actually opened up another level of tinkering that we had not done on the concept phase. It's one of those classic projects that goes from concept looks good and in theory would work. And then you go into production of having to do it X amount of times over the timeline. And you go, is it going to get tiresome seeing a frame build on and then build off, build on, and then build off, build on, and
Interesting. Yeah.
so there were these other caveats that you need to think about, and then we go, well, we can't put that. We need to add another color into the sequence, and so Loki is green. And so of course we added green, but then we have a sequence that's black and white and gray and then red and green. And so
Cool.
that opens up for, you can't have red and green shots back to back. It's Christmas time. So,
Right.
and then we decided, and Jen, I think, was the one to decide, okay, how about a gold in there too? And so Idris Elba's card is a gold card that, and a couple other ones I think we used for a couple of the actresses, and maybe a couple of the there's a fire flame shot we had some gold into. So the development, I mean, that just comes from getting in there and doing it, and having.
Right.
And then the last thing about that was really cool I really fought hard and kept pushing to get them to end on the Thor with his hammer down. There's a great shot and it's lightning coming out. I added all the lightning in, but they didn't want to add any names over cards. Every card had to have a name because of the time
Hmm.
purposes. But our last card with Loki and the card before that with Thor with the hammer down, they both don't have any names. And it was a massive fight early on because it
Oh,
kind of
interesting.
ended without seeing Thor for a while.
Mm,
So we thought we got all of our Thor shots down early anyway. So it got to that last scene and we go, we got to see Thor, got to see Thor. And then Marvel said, okay, yeah, let's put Thor at the end. And we got
that's
Thor at the
awesome.
end with a big red explosion. The cape comes out, and it was awesome, an awesome victory for us. The whole
That's
piece,
so cool.
the whole piece was a crazy victory, and and yeah, it kicked off a lot more in the Marvel universe and other worlds. But yeah, I got asked to do that style quite a few times afterward, and I did it for
I'm sure.
a couple projects. I tried to emulate myself, and I couldn't. I forgot how I did it, and so I kind of came up with different. Like I was in some kind of weird zone or something. I mean, I knew how I did it, but I didn't like want to do the same thing or something. I don't know.
Right, right. Well, I was able to discover your medium and some of the case studies that you write up on your projects, and you did do a case study for this one, and I loved that you had written this comment on how you used a chaotic flurry of energetic brushwork to sort of bring this like title sequence to life. And I think you had mentioned too that you had sort of like built out your scanned brushstroke library, like you were creating like hand ones too, in addition to whatever digital
Yeah,
ones you had.
right.
Um, did you choose certain brushes with regards to like maybe roughness and texture over others to convey this sort of creative direction? Or did you just really kind of just take a paintbrush to a surface and just say like, okay, let's have at it. Let's see what works and what doesn't work.
No, it definitely wanted to go for a drier brush feel. It couldn't feel goopy. It couldn't
True.
feel liquidy. I didn't want those to come across in the final
Hmm.
execution, but I felt like a dry brush where you could see that there was paint on it, and then it gradually came off as it went across the surface, and that
Yeah.
would kind of coincide conceptually with the film. I mean, without seeing the film beforehand, it's difficult a lot of the time to know if you're headed on the right direction with the concept because you
Hmm.
only see the trailer, perhaps, and you can be really off base. But the movie was darker, and they clearly changed complete gears from it with Thor Ragnarok and went, more comedic base with Taika coming in and dominating that. But Thor 2 had that slurry, and I'm glad I wrote that. That's very nice. I'll need to quote myself on that sometime. But yeah, the brushwork did have to have a complexity to their shape language, and got fortunate that I was able to turn them, twist them, flip them, erase out of them, and with about 20 favorites, the whole sequence was made with about 20 brushes. But I didn't apply them by drawing; I applied them by stamping.
Oh,
Does that
okay.
make any sense? Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yes, yeah. Of course it is. It was like I never like made it into a brush. I just used it as a stamp texture, the scan
I
brush,
see.
so I could increase it and decrease it, increase it a little bit because then you lose some quality of the paintbrush side. But then you can flip, 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 rotate in Photoshop right before you apply, and then I can take an eraser, use the same brush as an eraser, go in and take out of it, or different brushes as an eraser, so that
Right.
20 brush strokes ended up becoming about 400. Uh,
Wow.
in numerous because you can how
Right.
many times
Right.
you can flip it or rotate the different strokes. So Yeah, it was really a weird way to work. I was definitely working with them, the strokes as textures in there.
Yeah, no, no, that's really cool to hear how, like, sort of from the technical side of it too, how you're sort of building this out and, using them as assets to sort of create these frames. I think you had also mentioned in your case study too, I think it says 46 images, but now it sounds like maybe it was more like 65, that you had to paint, that amount in 4 weeks. And I'm assuming you had a couple rounds of revisions within this time frame as well. So if you don't mind me asking, how quickly did you have to knock out like the first set of illustrations, like for that first round?
Well, I think it got down to 3 a day.
Okay.
I think
Wow.
I think I told the I never worked as hard in my life on a project. And now I come to remember it. I do remember staying at that studio very late for many nights in a row,
Mm,
getting there early and just having so much pride because it's my name on it at the end of the day. It's not it says illustration. There was no other illustrators. It's on
wow.
my shoulders. Like, this needs to be right. And
Right.
uh and the creative director, Jen, she has a heck of an eye at Blur, and she just kept me in line. And it was a hell of a team effort for them to get all that done. But I knew that I couldn't let down my team by not getting an illustration delivered. And you're right, there were multiple revisions per illustration. Sometimes there was upwards of, I couldn't get Natalie Portman's face right. It was just not with that. So guys are rougher and they're chiseled and they have armor and everything. And then Natalie Portman's hair was great and a lot of the flowy stuff, but the softness of the face was a little bit tricky to get with the stroke language, because these strokes I had chosen were all were very rough. And so
Right.
that one probably took about maybe eight times back and forth with Marvel. And I think Natalie Portman's team maybe approved it, but their team needs
Wow.
to, a lot of the time, their team needs to approve stuff. Reynolds' team needed to approve some stuff with him for the Deadpool 2 DVD. Brolin's team, I think, needed to approve his likeness and the way that I drew him for that same DVD. So, uh, yeah, they needed it needs to hit the mark.
Right. Right. No, it's fun. It makes sense that you're saying it, but you kind of, I wouldn't have thought of that, that like, not only is Marvel making a decision maker in this whole process, but then like the likeness of the actors and their teams as well are also decision makers. So that's really interesting to hear that, like, the revisions were even going to like Natalie Portman herself.
Yeah, I would almost imagine, and I mean, maybe just her manager or something, but
Right.
it needs to get right on the money, especially when their names pops up. There can't be any doubt.
Right. Right. No, it makes
But that
sense. It
was
makes complete sense.
yeah, it was upwards of three of those a day, and I started to kind of slow down in the last week and maybe do two a day, but that's still 4 hours per illustration at
Right.
4K with those layers, and it was a lot of work, but ultimately I wouldn't change it for the world. And I get to talk about it still
Absolutely.
today.
I know, I know.
41 years.
It sounds like it was a piece that like truly left its mark, that you had like you really believed in your gut and stuff too. So it's really cool to hear about, when we have guests on the show and they have such a passion for their specific frame that they're sharing, and then the project itself. It's just really cool to kind of like hear you guys, kind of like recount it and talk about it and be like, yeah, this was a fun one. It was a lot of work, but, my God, like, yeah, my name's on it at the end and I'm really proud of it. And it was a great team. Like, I just love it. I love that story.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, you do get pretty attached and pumped with the team, and it's such a camaraderie experience
Yep.
of learning areas that I wouldn't necessarily have as much knowledge in, and be able to help someone else do their job better by doing things better on my end. And so I joke about the unnamed layers thing, but that happened like once, and after that, it was, you've never seen a cleaner file in your whole life. Because again, I was not going to waste their time going through trying to find where
Right.
the eye highlight was. It was pinpoint precision of how I delivered from there on out, after realizing that, hey, this is really there's a lot of people going to touch this. The animators
For
need to
sure.
know what's going on.
For sure. Um, and one last question, or actually two more questions, if that's okay. But
Yeah.
other than the fact that it was like you got the brief of like, hey, this is supposed to be, we want this done in an illustrative style. Did Blur give you any other project constraints to work within while you're working on these designs, or is it really just the fact that like, hey, this is the style and the direction that we kind of want to go?
Yeah, they came up with, I can't remember. I there were no they were so good about no constraints on that one, but there might have been, I don't even know if they gave me any reference. Um,
Okay,
I can't remember. I'll need to look. I actually have the PDF still. I'm sure they did because the art director on that one was Norn Jordan, and she's so good about attaching reference and kind of knowing where to cast Justin in certain ways.
hmm,
And then I really can be my best self and our best selves when we have a ballpark, and
right, right,
and I think that's where that one fell. But I do remember me only having the trailer to go off of the first movie, and so that image is from the first movie. I pulled a still from and I painted on top of it, and so applied that to the second movie because there was nothing out for Thor 2 at the time of pitching on the sequence.
sure, sure,
And so, which was really awesome
yeah,
to be able to translate from a YouTube clip, a high HD clip, or maybe not even HD, and just like, let's just work off of this one. And it
right,
was, yeah, and it was footage based as well. It wasn't like I wasn't freehand illustrating that as opposed to a lot of other stuff I do, because we
right.
wanted to. I thought at first we are going to do transitions, possibly of freeze frames, and or possibly, and then it has to be like 1-to-1 and everything, and like a Sherlock Holmes prologue type of thing. But uh, no, but there ended up being no footage and just all paintings. So it was
Gotcha.
awesome. Yeah.
And then lastly, were there any challenges or rewards that you experienced while on the project other than what you've named already? Or was it really just that, hey, I got some really awesome style frame, opportunities out of this afterwards?
Yeah. That's a good, yeah. I feel like the reward was knowing that you can push yourself in a direction that you've never been before, and execute something. And it kind of was they say that level up term. I kind of felt like I leveled up with that one and leveled
Yeah,
up with each one in each project. Even obviously till even today, you get the most excited about progressing in your field and progressing down the pathway that you're going, and not just repeating yourself or not just doing something that looks just like the hot new thing. And when you are able to infuse your personal passion into it, the final result feels so much better. I think that the Thor frames looked they looked a certain way because I was so driven and so connected to the material of wanting to make just do justice to a comic book film. Somebody else that might not care too much about comic book films is, it sounds derogatory, they're not, but it was they might not really invest as much, but I mean, who knows, but I'm just so connected to it that it was like that kind of connection of wanting to do my best possible work. That was really where I think that project flourished like that. Yeah.
absolutely. No, that makes sense. Not only are you passionate about what you do, right? As a designer, as an illustrator, but then, just having that just like passion of comic books and the love of comic books, I'm sure that obviously contributes to, the work you're, pouring yourself into it with it too. So that's really cool to hear.
1,000%. And we got to pitch on a few others after that, and then some other companies. Swarovski called me to pitch on title sequences for Marvel films, and continue to get asked to do pitches for them. And it's every single time it's like that your heart kind of goes like, it's like a heartbeat moment where you don't want to let anybody down, and you want to do something that you feel is necessary for the story, and
Absolutely.
pushes the narrative or helps the director out. I really like that aspect of the style frames, is that you can help. A lot of the time we can fill in the gaps if there's a gap to be filled for a director, or something that
Yes.
needs to be retouched upon, or an opening title sequence is so different than an end title sequence in that way. Opening titles, you can't. I wouldn't go and just show a bunch of footage from the film because they haven't seen it yet. It's like an intro type of thing.
Right.
You see, that's you love the work that Elastic does on so many of their opening titles, and yeah, there's just such a way to conceptually address those nuances and problems.
For sure, for sure. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, chatting with you about, the frame that you picked out from, Thor 2 and, just learning a bit about, your background in motion design and illustration. Um, Thank you so much, for coming on the show today. This conversation has just been really cool. I'm so glad that you're able to join us on such short notice. If people want to connect with you and learn more about what you're working on, what's the best way for them to do so?
Um, I would, but well, first of all, thank you very much for that and for having me. I would say, but Twitter, yeah, Twitter and Instagram for sure. Claus Studios, all one word. CLAUS Studios, and that's on Twitter and Instagram, and that's where I'm at the most. And then my website is clausstudios.com. So, yeah, and what you're doing is really great, and getting Styleframes out there. And you know what the thing is? It's maybe Saturday Styleframe Saturdays, but I do Styleframes every day of the week.
Well, the
We
last
don't, I'm
guest
just
that
kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
hey, sometimes that's something that comes up on Twitter a lot, or not just Twitter, but like, social media, the MoGraph portals that they are,
I love
people
them.
are always just like, everyone's always just like, I love this so much that I do it on the weekends, but I need a break sometimes. And it's sort of like,
Oh, cool.
that's when you love something, right? You're so passionate about it. You do it, Monday through Friday, but then you want to dive into it on the weekends too. So I
Yes.
would totally believe you if you were doing it 24/7, 365,
Yeah.
Justin.
Yes. You got to prepare for the next project. There's got to be some new personal
Exactly.
stuff you could insert into these things. That's where our small, tiny victories come up. That's what gets
Exactly.
the engine going. And I was going to say about you mentioned I love the Twitter motion graphics community. I've I've you know,
Yeah.
I've been really communicating with them and just addressing them so much more than I ever have. Just with what kind of fan base there is out there for motion design.
Yeah.
I didn't have a clue 'cause I was over on Instagram so often, and I was kind of off the Twitter thing, and then I flipped over, and it's been great. So yeah, I'll make sure to also reshare this on all those platforms.
Well, we would greatly appreciate that. Thank you, Justin.
You got it.
Well, again, this has been awesome. Thank you so much again for taking the time out of your day to chat with us. We'll share some links to some of the tools, resources, and studios that we mentioned here for our audience to check out. But that wraps it up for today, everyone. Feel free to email us at styleframesatpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think of the show. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, if you like what you see and hear here, don't forget to subscribe, share, and review the show on your favorite podcasting platforms as well. And lastly, come connect with us on social. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And we'll see you all in the next one.